All right, we are back again for another episode of our Extreme Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm super lucky to have Alan Arnette with us today. Alan and I were on Everest together in 2008 and have been in touch off and on ever since then. And, Alan has been a great chronicler of Mount Everest and other 8,000 meter peaks, huge wealth of knowledge and information around everything mountaineering, and that ties into leadership and team building as well. So we're great to have Alan here. Thanks for spending a bit of time with us, Alan.
Hey Scott, good to see you, man. Been a
Yeah.
long time, too long.
Yes.
And I would really call my interest in mountaineering, especially Everest, more of an obsession. So, hi, my name is Alan.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I think many of us are in that same camp as you. There have been countless times I've been sitting on the side of the mountain thinking, I'm going to sell everything, I'm going to quit. Or you get home and you're like, never again. And then a week later, you're like, I got to go somewhere, I got to do something.
I know that the half life of memories. One of my sayings were memories are everything, and sometimes I think in mountaineering, memories are nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, we it's like in Ted Lasso they talk about the goldfish, right? The goldfish has got the
Yeah,
super short memory. We forget all the bad times and the discomfort and the lack of sleep and the cold and all that, and you just want to go back for the adventure again.
we just like suffering.
Yeah, yeah. Suffering is certainly part of the adventure, or it has to be anyway. So, so Alan has summited Everest. Alan has climbed K2. I think the I don't really want to go into age, but you're the oldest American to climb K2. Is that right, Alan?
Yeah, I'm shocked at this. I still have the American age record at age 58 to be
Yeah,
the oldest American to have summited K2. And
nice.
that's lasted for 10 years. I'm really surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's good. Good to keep on going, as we get older, you can still do some pretty extreme stuff. You got to keep
what's interesting about that, though, Scott, very briefly, is that we were at base camp and we had a gentleman there that was 62,
mm,
and we got to talk. He goes, "Hey, I might be the oldest one to summit," and so we went to the databases and did some searches, and we identified all the Americans, and sure enough, if he would have summited, he would have been the
mm,
oldest. And I realized, oh, I'd be the oldest, but I had no idea going into it,
yeah,
and that was never part of my calculus.
yeah,
It was, I was climbing for many other reasons.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same. Certainly for me, when you get into like the seven summits, and yeah,
Yeah,
I've climbed the seven summits, but I never set out to climb the seven summits. Just something that happened,
yeah.
and I wasn't really even kind of aware I was doing it until got to a certain stage. But anyways, before we get into the really talking about leadership and team building stuff, let's get to know Alan a little bit here. Certainly I know a fair bit about you, but let's get our listeners to know a little bit about you. Um, so tell us a bit about your background, Alan. How did you start climbing? Because I think you started a little bit later in life, I
Oh
believe.
yeah, big time. Yeah, so born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, altitude 100 meters, 300 feet, and so in Memphis, it was on the banks of the Mississippi River. You couldn't even see a mountain. The biggest mountain was one of the buildings in downtown. But I was a Boy Scout, and so I enjoyed nature. And I give my parents a lot of credit for this. They took us on every year on a family vacation, and one year we came to Colorado,
Hmm.
and I saw Long's Peak, 14,000 feet. It's just right out my window here,
Yeah.
and I live in Colorado now. And that somehow planted a seed in me, but that seed was dormant because we talk about leadership a lot. Well, I was obsessed with my career. So I got a degree in electrical engineering, and I joined Hewlett Packard in sales. And I never wanted to be an engineer because I knew that management made more money than engineers do. So I went through the ranks, and I ended up having a fantastic career. And I was actually lived for 5 years in Europe. So I spent 2 years in Amsterdam and 3 years in Geneva, Switzerland. And there I took my first big climb of Mont Blanc
Hmm.
and just absolutely fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that seed that was planted in Colorado as a 12-year-old began to grow. So I did a trek to Mount Everest Base Camp in 1997, and then I started doing a climb, at least one every year for the next 25 years. And to your point, I didn't. My first climb of Mont Blanc was at age 38.
Yeah.
So kind of a not your typical dirt bag or living in the back of a car type of thing.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I've been on around 37 major expeditions in my life.
Yeah. Amazing. And you have, through that time, you have become one of the leading experts on all things Everest through your
Yeah,
website. And so how did that come about?
yeah, that's kind of it's an interesting story. It was, I'm a firm believer in just not destiny, and not that you have a path that's laid out for you, but I'm a firm believer that when windows open up in your life, that you have an obligation to jump through that window, and that let life take you wherever life takes you. So in that sense, I went to Everest in 2000, which at base camp in '97. Climbed a few more things. I'm going to Blanc Choil you. And then I went to Everest in 2002 and three, and then again in eight. And man, those were those were tough. I didn't make it. Scott, I committed the greatest sin that a climber can commit, and that is the sin of arrogance.
Mm,
That I overestimated my capability
right.
and I underestimated the difficulty of the mountain. But then something dramatic happened in my life. It actually was around 2006 that my mother, Ida, that she had Alzheimer's, but the symptoms became very obvious. And so I took a retirement from a 30-year career with Hewlett Packard to oversee her care. And then as the disease progressed, I thought about what it is that I can do to honor her. And I made a vow to her that I was not going to let Ida Arnette's death from Alzheimer's become yet another number on a long list of forgotten names. So I dedicated my climbing to her, and I did get sponsorship to go climb the seven summits in 2011. And I summited Everest there and raised money for Alzheimer's and honored my mom, and I got a summit.
Yeah. And I think, that's it's such a great story because it's for so many of us, we need to have, it's more than just, I don't know what it is. Is it more than just the challenge, but there has to be a purpose behind it. And I think, that certainly, that purpose of Alzheimer's and honoring your mom really kind of took that whole experience to another level for you.
Yeah, I had this consulting business called Summit Coach,
Yeah.
and that's part of what I'm doing this phase of my life. I call it Alan 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So I'm somewhere in that later stage now. And I coach people that want to get into climbing, and maybe they have zero experience, or maybe they've done 5 to 7 summits and they want help in getting Everest and
Mm,
maybe Vincent or something. But the first call, we spend at least 20 minutes on why.
yeah.
Why do you want to do this? And I have this little speech, and I'll make it very short here. But the speech is that your why is important because I promise you, you will hit the wall
Hmm.
when you go and try to do something difficult, whether it's climbing a mountain, learning French, raising a kid, being married.
Yeah.
You got to know what your why is. And in my case, I was climbing for all the wrong reasons early in my career. And once, in my opinion, I reframed it and started climbing for a greater purpose, as
Hmm.
you just said, a
Yeah.
greater why.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I had this intersection of purpose and passion in my
Yeah.
life. I have a purpose of climbing mountains, or passion of climbing mountains, and a purpose of being an Alzheimer's advocate. And then from then on forward, I just did things I never ever thought I could do because I was climbing for something greater than just my own selfish reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And one of the things that I talk about in some of my presentations is that um, you need to know what motivates you and you need to know what inspires you. And those two things are different, but they're both important. And
Yeah,
finding
absolutely.
out those things, I would say that motivation will kind of pull you along the way, but inspiration, pushes you. People who are motivated can only go so far, but when you're inspired, you can walk to the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
Both of them are important, but they both work in different areas. So let's get into, some conversations around leadership now. And, I'd love it if you could, share some stories with us from your personal experiences or even just through your historical knowledge of Everest and the expeditions that have happened on there. Like you've got some great insights in there. So first of all, um, when you look at somebody who is aspiring to climb Mount Everest, I think we touched on some of this stuff right now already. What do you think are some of those critical characteristics that an aspiring Everest climber needs to have?
Well, I think you have to have curiosity, and that curiosity is multifaceted. It's curious if you can do it.
Yeah.
It's curious about the experience. It's curious about the culture that you're going to wherever you're going in the world. Um, and again, I'll come back to the why, and that'll be a reoccurring theme because I think why is so critically important, whether it's for a leader or for a follower. So again, I think humility is a really important thing, a willingness to learn. If you are arrogant, if you think you know everything, then chances are you don't know very much. Because the biggest thing with a new climber that I get into is that we just don't know what we don't know. If you've never been above 7,000 meters, you just don't know. And you can go to a barometric chamber or altitude tent and simulate that, but that's different than being out there, with a minus 40 centigrade wind chill. So I think, the curiosity, the humility, the willingness to learn, the willingness to be a good team member. I always joke with people. I say, you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
You're always late to the meeting. You look like you're a walking yard sale. You're not taking care of yourself. You've got, a 12-day shadow beard, whatever it is. You don't want to be that guy or gal. You want to represent the team and represent your teammates with a semblance of pride and professionalism.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a funny saying that every team has one of those people. And if you don't know who it is, then it might be you.
I love it.
Exactly. So with that, to build on that, so those are some of the characteristics I think an aspiring Everest climber should have. But these Everest expeditions have got leaders. And so what traits do you think does a great leader need to have on an extreme expedition, be it Mount Everest or another 8,000 meter peak or something similar?
Yeah, I mean, I have been extremely lucky to climb with some fantastic people and some people that I never want to see again in my life. So it's pretty much the bell curve. And the same goes for the people that I climbed with. Scott, I actually organized a handful of expeditions myself. I put one together to go to Pakistan and climb Broad Peak.
Mm-hmm.
Never again, never again. Because what I discovered? That there was gambling going on in the casino, that people lie.
Yeah.
We're on Broad Peak, we're going up to Camp One, and there's this guy, I don't even give his nationality, but he's sitting on a little shoulder and he's smoking a cigarette. And I said, "What are you doing, man?" He goes, "Oh, well, I've accomplished what I want to accomplish." What, smoke a cigarette at 6,000 meters? What? And he goes, yeah. I said, wait a minute, I thought you climbed all this other stuff, and so now you only get Broad Peak. Oh no, I didn't climb any of that. I just lied to get on the expedition.
Right.
So that's when it comes back to the integrity and being willing to be a good team member.
Mm-hmm.
All those responsibilities. Leadership is a word that we often apply to a role in an organization. But in reality, every single person is a leader, and every single person is a follower.
Yeah.
So you ask me, what's the characteristics of a good leader of an expedition? The first word that comes to my mind is communications.
Yeah.
That they have to be a good listener as well as a good communicator, proactively.
Yeah.
I've been on expeditions where the leader, will say, "Hey, what's the schedule?" They'll go, "You don't worry about that. I'll tell you what you need to know when you need to know it." And talk about shutting down any positive momentum in the group. I mean, all of a sudden now you don't want to ask anybody, ask him anything because he's treating you not with respect. So, and also, a lot of us, I was with you in 2008 and I got into serious trouble, but I was unable to communicate my difficulties to our leader at that time.
Mm.
And I went home, of all the mountains, I don't call them failures. I've never failed on a
Oh.
mountain. I've just non-summited.
Well,
I'm
and
about,
we need to look at those as learning experiences because there's something that happened there that we can learn from.
I always say that failure, the word failure, because I came back from that climb and somebody said, Alan, I'm sorry about your failure on Mount Everest.
Yeah.
And I really thought a lot about that. And in my mind, a failure is when you try something hard, you don't accomplish it, and you don't learn from it. That's what a failure is.
Yeah.
And I have learned from every one of my non-summits. But, I think communication is probably the number one trait that I would look for in any leader.
Yeah.
Often I was with Hewlett Packard for 30 years, and I saw a lot of outstanding engineers get promoted to management, and outstanding engineers, and they improvement to
Yeah.
be a manager, to be a leader of people.
Yeah, yeah. Just because we're really good at our job doesn't mean that we'll be a good leader. I've been on many expeditions as well, where, in some cases I've been the expedition leader. Sometimes I've not been the expedition leader, and sometimes, as you're referring to, right, really amazing, super strong, accomplished personal climbers get into leadership positions, and they might be a super high performance individual, but they're
Right.
not a good leader. I always say you got to be in a leadership role for the right reason. And it's not because of, you know, ego and, pays and benefits and whatever. You have to be there because your job as a leader is to help your team be successful.
Right.
And that
Right.
should be your number one driver as a leader, is to help the people on your team be successful. It's not about you, it's about them. This is what we in our leadership training programs, we talk about servant leadership and being that servant leader. Um, so I was going to talk with you, a little bit more about how leaders can erode trust and break things down, or also egos. I think we've touched on that a little
Sure.
bit
Yep. Yeah.
already. So,
Yep.
I don't think we need to go there so much, but let's go into team building. So, as I just mentioned, the servant leadership, and a servant leader is there to build a team to accomplish great goals. So, first of all, thinking about an Everest expedition, how would you define a high performance team in an adventure setting? What would so we've mentioned communication, but are there other things that you think within a team, not from a leadership perspective, but from a team, how do you define a high performance team?
Well, I think there's two or three words that immediately come to my mind as usual. One is a sense of humor.
Okay.
If you've got the person that's terminally professional. I was on one Everest climb, and this gentleman was um, one of the long range fighter bomber
Mm.
pilots, and he would take off from Missouri and go drop bombs in the Middle East, and then come back home. And so he would be in that cockpit for 30 hours by himself. And this guy was obviously super intelligent, but he had an unbelievable IQ. He had an unbelievably low EQ.
Yeah.
And so as a result, he isolated himself from an entire
Mm.
team. And it just created a dynamic where it was almost an us and them, because everybody's going, did I say something? What did we do to him? And it ended up, it was just his personality.
Yeah.
And so, it's not right or wrong. That's just who he is. And I think it was also somewhat learned behavior by virtue of this incredibly dangerous mission job that
Mhm.
he had. But I think that trust is another really big one between people. I was on my second Everest trip. I was roped up between two people. We left Camp One in a whiteout, and I stepped inadvertently on top of a snow bridge and fell into a crevasse
Mhm.
down about 3 meters. And luckily, Geralder from Iceland self-arrested. He was in the lead and stopped my fall,
Yeah.
because it was the proverbial bottomless pit. My feet were just swinging in the
Yeah.
air. And so Rob from Chicago came up behind, and he's like, Alan, are you okay? I'm going, yeah, Rob, get me out of here. So I started front pointing. He started pulling me out. All this stuff about Z pulleys and rescue systems, forget it. You just grab somebody and pull them.
And pull.
So
Get the adrenaline going and pull.
you got it. You got it. But, that's trust. And if it hadn't been for my two teammates, then I wouldn't be here today. Full
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
And I've got, unfortunately or fortunately, I have several of those stories from
Yeah.
my climbing. But also in a corporate environment, a team is it not only is there trust, but at the leadership level, in at least in American football, that there's a saying about having a coach's coach and a player's coach. In other words, the person in leadership position, the manager, if you will, are they managing to please the people above them on the org chart or the
Yeah.
people below them? And I've always my management style, and I was very fortunate to be a very high level manager in a lot of jobs, leading hundreds of millions of dollars in P&L and leading thousands of people. And I always felt that my job as a manager or even as a team member is to foster an environment where people could achieve their maximum human objectives.
Yeah.
Foster that environment. So what that environment is an environment of trust and openness, up and down. It's an environment of collaboration. It's an environment of humor, of humility, and also of the willingness to push the envelope to try to do breakthrough stuff. I talked earlier, we started off about what's your why in mountain climbing, because that's going to help you get through the wall when you go back to why you're there. The same thing in an organization. If you're unclear on what you're trying to accomplish as a business or as an enterprise, I guarantee you're not going to achieve up to your maximum potential. And that all starts with clarity, and not the mission, vision, purpose statements, but stuff that people can really relate to and understand.
Yeah, really that initial forming stage as a team. And one of the things that I often say is that the foundation of all high performance teams is relationship.
Mm.
We don't do things for each other because we have to. We do things for each other because we want to.
Right.
And again, getting in trouble on a mountain, you want people to want to help you.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that would have been kind of tough if they would have said, just leave
Yeah,
him in the
yeah,
crevasse.
yeah, exactly. But
You know,
they were tied to you, so they didn't have any choice.
but just a quick bookmark on that story. I got out of the crevasse and I sat on my pack and I just started bawling because I had really come close
Yeah,
to death, and I knew it. And so I began to question whether I should even be there or not. This was on my second Everest climb.
yeah,
And it took me forever to get to the next camp. And when I got there, everybody could see that I was a basket case. And so what my teammates did is they started making jokes. Yeah, we should have left you in that
yeah,
crevasse. Look at you. You're a pile of porridge. You're useless. Are you gonna do this again to us? And then I started to join in with a self-deprecating humor. And pretty soon, I'd gotten my confidence back. And that next day, climbing the Lhotse Face was one of my best days ever on the mountain.
yeah,
So
yeah,
sometimes going through that trial, that
yeah,
suffering, you come out the other end a better person.
yeah. So, building of team is really important. And as we were talking, just before we started this recording, I don't think that a lot of modern Everest expeditions really put much focus on team
Mm.
anymore. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. And do they spend any time on it? And what do you think the result is?
Yeah, I think it varies incredibly widely. There's one company out of Australia, Mike Hamill's climbing the Seven Summits, and he actually has. So forgive me if I'm crude here, but he has a no dicks policy,
Okay.
and it's on their website.
Yeah.
And basically what it is that if you're a jerk and you can't get along with other people, we don't want you on our
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
Um, and they vet all of their clients very, very carefully.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of other Western teams like Alpine Ascents. Um, um, I'm spacing his name. He stopped guiding now. The Canadian um, that used to go to Everest all the time. Anyway,
Tim,
um,
Tim Ripple
yeah,
or
Tim Ripple. Tim Ripple.
yeah.
He used to vet his people very closely. Jamie McGinnis did.
Hmm.
So there is a precedent still in modern day mountaineering for the team matters.
Yeah.
Where I think it breaks down is when there's the business models are quality. I hate to even put it this way, but it's volume at a low price
Hmm.
and high price at a low volume.
Yeah.
So you got 10 people that paid 100,000 each, or you've got 100 people that paid 30,000 each. And so it's different business models that different companies now are using. It's just like airlines.
Yeah.
You've got six first class seats and you've got 600 economy seats. But these 100-person teams, I mean, it's a team of individuals,
Yeah.
and they're from all over the world. Typically, there's cliques that are forming, so there is that bond, but
Mm.
it's certainly not 100 people working
Yeah.
in unison.
Yeah. So you're in these little sub teams forming within the larger team. And but to go back to, these companies that do vet, to get people with the right personal fit to the team. And then, I wonder if people are spending, so just because you have the right people on the team, though, doesn't mean you're going to evolve into a high performance team, right? There's going to be some further steps that need to happen in order to become that high performance team.
Very much so. I can. It's almost impossible for me to tell you the story of my experience on K2 in the time that we
Mm.
have. But I originally was going to go just Kami Sherpa
Yep.
out of Pangboche, whom I summited Everest with in 2011. I still call I call his family my Nepali family. He calls us his American family, and I'm incredibly close to all of his children who are all grown now, and they know my family. So it's become a very personal relationship with them. But on K2, um, you know, I mentioned this earlier that there's followership and there's leadership, and and I'm not a strong climber. I mean, you can attest to that. I can barely get up the stairs, but but I am very determined, and when I set my mind to something, I become very willing to do whatever it takes to within reason to accomplish it. K2 is tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard mountain. Don't let any of the commercialization make you think differently. It's steep. It starts steep and steep in the middle, end steep, rock fall, avalanche, high winds. It's a tough mountain.
Gold.
It's
Yeah.
much harder than Everest, in my opinion. And Everest is not a cakewalk. But in that expedition, I was going to do it myself with Kami, and then I found out that Garrett Madison, who had just broken off from Alpine Ascents, that he was starting his own company a few years earlier, and he wanted to go over there for the first time. And so I knew Garrett's reputation, and so I forgot who called who, but somehow or another, I ended up going with him on his team, and it really wasn't a commercial climb. It was more like a climb of just like-minded people because
Yeah.
none of us knew what we were doing in Pakistan or on K2. Kami was the only member of our team that had actually been there before. And so we started off with a large group of not large, 10 people. There were some trekkers and then two or three other climbers. Anyway, as usually say, it went down to just a small number of people. And it was myself, Garrett, Matt Dupre, and then we had Kami Rita Sherpa, who just got his 29th
Yeah.
summit of Everest record for that, and then Furkacha Sherpa. So there's six of us. You talk about a tight team. I mean, the six of us could finish each other's sentences.
Yeah.
We understood, who needed help when. We were constantly encouraging one another, and I'm not going to go into it, but I did develop pulmonary edema, and it was extremely difficult. And I developed it on going out of high camp to the summit, and I summited anyway. It's another long story, but the camaraderie and the support that everybody showed for one another, and all of us had moments of doubt and weakness, but none of us experienced those moments in isolation.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the case study of a high performing team.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about the environment that you create as a team culture that really makes the experience so much richer for everyone and allows you.
It's what you said earlier. It's the relationships and the trust.
And allows you to step outside your comfort zone, to do things that you didn't think that you could do because you've got this great support network. So, maybe let's talk about some of the more tragic pieces on Everest. Everest last year, record number of deaths.
Yeah.
And we've talked about some of the different hypotheses of why some of these happened, and some of them were preventable. But what role do you think poor leadership or lack of teamwork plays in some of these, deaths that are occurring on Everest every year now?
So yeah, if you use the Himalayan database and go mine that, which I do a lot to get all
Hmm.
my data, um, on average, you'll have 4 to 6 people will die year in, year out on Everest. Some years it's one, and then you have horrible years like 2023 where you had 18 Everest climbers. Now,
Hmm.
2015, there were like 21 people who died, but some of those were journalists or
Yeah.
photographers. They weren't climbers. So last year was the highest for Everest climbers. By my count, 11 of those were preventable. So when I say that, when you think about climbing, anybody who's climbed these big mountains knows that that is part of the bargain that you make with the mountain, that you may not come home alive, that there's rockfall, there's serac releases, there's crevasses, and then there's stuff inside of us that we have no idea
Hmm.
that gets triggered by the pressure and this, the stress of the altitude and the low oxygen. So an aneurysm, a heart attack, something like that happens. And that's what accounts for most of those, what I would call expected deaths. That's zero comfort to the families, but I understand. Then you got the ones I think are preventable. And those are the ones that the person began to show signs of problems, but they didn't turn themselves around, or their Sherpa or their guide did not turn them around. To me, that's a failure of leadership right there. Actually, it's a failure of personal
Yeah.
responsibility and of leadership. And then you've got the person that there were several cases last year where people were quote unquote lost or they disappeared.
Yeah.
So I, for life of me, do not understand how you pay a company to guide you and then they lose you or you disappear without a trace. That is malpractice with the
Yeah.
most horrible outcome and horrible for the families. So that when you talk about turning around and the preventable deaths, all of those could have been prevented had the right leadership
Yeah.
shown itself at the right time.
Yeah, I think people sometimes, as we've spoken, not everybody goes in the role of leaders, should be a leader, and they're not always there for the right reasons. Some of these people are there for the prestige, for the ego, for the paycheck, and they don't really care that much about the team or the success of the team, or in some cases, the safety of the team. They're just, there to satisfy their own needs, perhaps.
And then sometimes the leadership of the organization puts somebody in a place when they're not ready for it.
Yeah.
A case study was last year on K2 when a Russian guide outfit refused to give up one of their Sherpas to go on the rope fixing team, and instead there was a Pakistani
Yeah.
porter who was assigned, and he had no experience at those altitudes, and he was ill equipped, and he ended up losing his life tragically.
Hmm. Yeah. So, leadership plays a big, big part in safety on the mountain and success on the mountain. And you got to have be on the right team. And there's lots of different teams, different makeups and
Oh
different
yeah,
cultures, right? And
yeah,
some
yeah.
people are going to
Just
fit really well on some teams. I
mhm.
remember even, when we were on Everest together in 2008, and there's multiple different teams,
Oh yeah.
and you can see all the different leaders and leadership styles and the different cultures within the teams. And some of you think, wow, I'm glad I'm not part of that team. And others you're like, oh, I kind of like that team. They seem pretty cool, right? So you get these different cultures forming. And one of the things I often say is that a leader has a disproportionate influence over team culture, and so teams start to take on the behaviors, the values, the characteristics of their team member. So you see this the team becoming a reflection of their leader, consciously or unconsciously. It's happening.
Yeah,
Let's move on to change here, because again, change is a
yeah.
big topic for leaders. Leaders have to initiate change sometimes. They have to navigate through change. They have to help teams go through change. So when a dramatic change occurs, how do you think a leader should process it? How do they share it with the team? Something that's happened beyond our insight, beyond our control. I'm the leader. How do I deal with it? How
Yeah.
do I share it with my team?
I mean, look at the pandemic, COVID a few years
Mhm.
ago, and how different businesses and different governments, different countries, different cultures dealt with it. You can Monday morning quarterback it all day long, But there's two or three things that are common denominators, I think, that showed success and is similar for for being on a mountain. The first principle that I would suggest about change is that embrace change.
Yeah.
Change will happen either unexpectedly or by
Yeah.
design.
Whether you want it to or not.
Something, I promise you that your business plan will not go as planned.
Mm-hmm.
Something, your climbing plan will not go as planned. I've got people right now on Everest through my summit coach business. I got 5 of them, and 2 of them did this pre-acclimatization using altitude tents at home.
Yeah.
And they were told by their operator they would acclimatize 7,000 meters.
Yeah.
And last night I had just a rip my heart out. One of my guys is you're not going to let him go up because he's just not acclimatizing.
Mm.
And so and everything. He even went to a altitude center in London and got tested, and he tested great.
Yeah.
But that's change. Something happened outside of his control, or something happened. So the first thing is embrace change and learn from it, and share the root cause reasons.
Mm-hmm.
If you miss your revenue target, talk to your team about it. Talk to your organization about it. If you don't achieve some R&D breakthrough or some cultural change, understand. Don't be afraid to dig into it and ask the 4-year-old, Daddy, why is the sky blue? Why does the sun come out? Why is it hot? Why is it cold? I mean, ask those questions until you tease out the root cause of what is causing that unwelcome change. And similarly, if you all of a sudden you're doing things like all of a sudden I was a terrible mountain climber, and then I became a great mountain climber. Not great, but good enough. And so what changed? Yeah. What changed, a lot of it was my preparation and how I viewed myself and how I framed why I was doing what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I could give you a very detailed explanation of why I went from not summiting 8,000 meter mountains to summiting 8,000 meter mountains. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just as important to know why something works as much as it's why something doesn't work. And that's all under the umbrella of change and change management.
Yeah. So historically, let's look at Everest for a minute, because Everest is pretty fascinating, and there's just lots of really interesting things that have happened on Everest. In your opinion, can you think of a story or an example of a dynamic or a big change that's happened on Everest and how climbers responded to it? Can you think of an example off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons. Probably one of the biggest, if you want to go there, was in 2014 when there were Sherpas going through the Khumbu Icefall. That's a 2,000-foot moving river of ice, but it moves at about 3 feet a day, about a meter a day. But it's not a moving smooth river. Yeah. It jerks. Yeah. Because the ice gets caught on the underlying bedrock, and then when there's enough friction from the gravity, then it'll move. And in this case, there were 50, 60 Sherpas that were in the icefall, and one of the ladders across the crevasses broke loose. And there's a dedicated team of Sherpas called icefall doctors. And so they all sat down on the ice and waited for them to come. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning, 5 a.m., which is common to climb then, because essentially that's when it's the coldest and the movement is least because the sun's not shining on it. Well, all of a sudden, this giant serac the size of a 100-story building, just a sliver, fell off, and it fell right on top of where those Sherpas were. And it buried 16 of them, losing their lives. So when that happened, they called it into the season, but it also caused a lot of companies to question whether climbing Everest from that side was still safe. Yeah. Some people said, hey, this happens. It's Mother Nature. We can't control it. All we can do is try to get through the icefall as fast as possible in the future. Maybe use helicopters to get some stuff into the Coon, other things. Some companies like Adrian Bollinger with Alpenglow, he said, you know what? The risk for my employees, for my staff, for my customers is unacceptable.
Too high.
So I will never, ever climb until something dramatically changes, which mitigates or reduces or eliminates that objective danger. So while other companies set out COVID year, he set out not only COVID because China closed their side of the mountain, but he also set out the next 4 years, and now he's back for the first time in 5 years,
Mhm.
and he is happy. He's like a little kid. He is just so gleeful. But there's a case where someone's making a well-informed business decision
Yeah.
that, how do you manage that change, and how do you deal with it? In other companies, just business as usual
Yeah.
continued.
Yeah. And from talking with people who are there right now, what's the condition of the ice fall this year?
It's crazy. It's very circuitous. I mean, it's going back and forth. It's not, when you and I did it, it was a reasonably straight
Yeah.
line. And you had maybe, I don't know how many ladders we had, Scott, about 20 maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know, some big number like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this year, it started off with only 3
And I
ladders
heard
for the
that. Yeah.
entire ice fall. I think it's up to 13 now.
Yeah.
But what took us, took you 6 hours to go through the ice fall, is taking people this year over 10 hours. And these are strong climbers, because I mean, just the geography that you've got
Yeah.
to go is much longer.
And
So
I
it's
guess
tougher this year.
there's been lack of snow as well, which is making it you're climbing on ice as opposed to snow, which is a lot more physically demanding.
Yeah, this past winter in the Himalayas was the warmest and least amount of snow in decades.
Yeah.
And so the Lhotse face, I was talking to one of my clients a few days ago, and she said that there were no steps kicked in. It's
Oof,
hard blue ice.
that's
And so
tough.
you've got to get purchased with your crampons in
Yeah.
every single step, which means you're kicking in
Yeah.
with the steps.
So much more work
Physical.
and hard on your ankles, hard on your knees, hard on your thighs. One of the things I always find interesting is the Nepali government always making changes. And what are some of the interesting changes that were thrown out this year?
Yeah, I have been documenting this since 2012, and I do an annual post called the Silly Rules Season,
Yeah.
and it becomes so predictable that it's sad. And the root cause of this is that the Nepali government is very unstable, and the new prime minister or the new president, the new head of the government comes in, and he fires all the underlying ministers of all the various departments, and he brings in his cronies. And his cronies come in with no experience in that particular area, but they want to get their cut,
With
and
them.
so
Yeah.
there's no continuity in the government. Therefore, they put these rules out, and there's been all sorts of rules, like people with disabilities can't climb, age limits 18 and 65. You can't climb by yourself. You One of the more recent ones, which I find interesting, is that they stipulated that now all operators must remove dead bodies from their team from the mountain.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, excuse me, what about not having a dead
Yeah.
body in the first
Yeah.
place? So unlike China, which has a limit of 300 permits and a requirement for foreigners of a 7,000-meter peak before you earn the right to climb Everest, Nepal's only requirement is you pay them $11,000
Yeah.
for the permit. There's
Yeah.
no experience requirement. There's no guide knowledge requirement. So the Supreme Court just issued some rules about three weeks ago that for 80% of the rules they put out there, they're duplications of the other silly rules over the last 10 years.
Mhm.
The sad fact is, or the real fact is, that the Nepali climbing industry is embedded in the government with relatives and friends. And if they don't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. And if there's anything that's going to reduce business, reduce revenue, it will not happen until something,
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to take.
Yeah.
You would think losing 18 people in 1 year, but they blame that on climate change.
Yeah.
And I, with all respect, a person didn't have an aneurysm because of climate change.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we could keep going on for a long time with all these conversations, but I want to move things on a little bit to our last topic I want to get to is resilience, because we've touched upon resilience, several times in many different ways through this conversation, but it's super critical because you're always going to have setbacks. You're going to have you're going to hit roadblocks. Nothing is going to go exactly as planned. So in your opinion, why is resilience so important on an 8,000-meter expedition?
Again, I hate to be a broken record, but it comes back to your why.
Yeah.
If you don't know why you're there, then having the fortitude, having the perseverance, having the resilience to deal with changes, to deal with suffering, to deal with the jerk teammate, the jerk
Mhm.
leader, if you don't know why you're there, it's just too damn
Yeah.
easy to give up.
Yeah.
And so I think resilience is one of those learned characteristics, and we learn it through a series of switchbacks,
Experience. Yeah.
of one step forward, two steps back type of thing.
Mhm.
Scott, I'm convinced people often ask me, why do you climb? And used to be I'd say for the view. That wasn't a very good answer. But the more I thought about it and reflected on my own experiences, I firmly believe, and I said this earlier, that by going through these climbs and going through the suffering and the being uncomfortable and the camaraderie, the deep satisfaction of accomplishing an objective you never thought you could, that you come home a better version of yourself. And I think that's a building element of resilience in you overall.
Mhm.
So you could almost use resilience as an umbrella term for self improvement, that you don't give up, that you stay with it. And the way you learn how to do that is through going through these seemingly impossible moments and maybe not accomplishing them, but definitely learning from them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that grows your resilience.
Yeah. And well, my dog is barking here because my doorbell just went off. My daughter's getting home from school and I didn't unlock the front door, so she's gonna have to come through the garage. She'll figure it out here. But we'll continue on our conversation here and she'll figure out how to get in the house. Resilience wise then, so what role do you think a leader plays in building resilience within the team or resilience within individuals within the team?
Yeah, I think it's helping to people to believe in themselves, that giving them an outlet that when things are not going right, they need support.
Yeah.
It could be all the way using mountain climbing as a metaphor. It could be, or anytime in business, is making sure the person has the right tools. It could be that maybe they need to run at a higher oxygen flow rate than everybody else. Do it. Just do it. It could be that, you've given them a territory which is physically impossible to cover as from a sales perspective, or you've given them a product to an R&D which requires technology which you don't have access to or hasn't been invented. All these roadblocks, I think it's up to the leadership and to create that environment again where those people can do their best. And that comes from communications, relationships, trust, belief, having a safe place to talk, and then just helping everybody understand that the greater goal is more important than the individual goal, and that collectively, it starts to sound like something out of Star Trek now, but collectively that that if we work well together, then we can accomplish things that we didn't think that we could individually.
And so just to start to wrap things up here, because we've only got so much time that we can put into this today. But what would you, if you want to wrap it up, and I think probably, broken record again, is, what would be your final advice for, leaders and aspiring Everest climbers to be successful and to build high performance teams?
I always tell people that if you want to become a good climber, climb with people better than you.
Yeah.
If you want to have a high performing organization, hire people in jobs that are better than you if you did their job. I think it's creating those environments where people have all the impediments are mitigated. You're not going to reduce them all. You're not going to eliminate objective danger climbing a big mountain like ice fall and crevasse danger and avalanches. But you can also don't go climb a mountain the day after a 2 meter snow.
Yeah.
That's how you mitigate that.
Yeah.
That's how you manage that.
Yeah.
Don't give a team a goal that you think is impossible just to impress your boss, because chances are they will fail.
Mhm.
I have a saying, I have all these little idioms, and one of them is it hard or is it impossible? And I found that there are very few things in life that are impossible. When I saw Amanda Blonde the first time, I said that was impossible. And I stood on the summit 2 years later.
Yeah.
When I thought about Everest, I said, that's impossible. K2, not even on the map. And I summited both of those.
Mhm.
But it took me some time. It took a lot of work, took a lot of effort. So was it impossible? No. Was it hard? Damn hard?
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah.
So, set hard goals. Don't be afraid to fail, to not achieve your goals, but then learn from them and apply those learnings. I often suggest to people, I always say, I want to go trek to Everest Base Camp. and I just say, I've said it now since 1997. If you have a chance to go trek in Nepal,
Amazing.
jump on it.
Yeah.
It will change your life for the better if you let it.
Yeah.
And that's the key. All these things we're talking about, there has to be an openness within you to accept a failure, to accept a change, to accept a difficulty, to accept a challenge. And if you embrace all of that and you navigate through it, you will come out the other side of that a better version of yourself, and that makes you having a better opportunity to be a better contributor to humanity.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to finish our conversation today, Alan. Maybe we can pick this up again and do, version 2 at another date, because like we got lots more that we could talk about. But it's been great to spend a little bit of time with you, and thanks for sharing your incredible stories, your insights with us. To our listeners of the Extreme Leadership Podcast, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hope it inspires you to reach new heights in your leadership and to really build high performance teams. And look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for coming, spending some time with us, Alan. And
It was really fun. I enjoyed
chat again
seeing you
soon.
again. It was an honor to be on your show. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alan.